better way or a more productive way is to say there's things changing, cracking. If I can see that, I know where I can work and have an impact with the limited resources and capacity I have. And so what I'm saying is exactly like that Japanese, I think it's called kitsugi, is rather than avoid the cracks or say, no, everything's fine, there's nothing wrong, it's perfectly smooth, to say, no, pay attention to the cracks. That's where the light gets in. That's where you can make a difference.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Adam Kahane, who will share how to have radical engagement. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. Today's guest is Adam Kahane, a global facilitator and author whose work has taken him into some of the toughest challenges of our time. From racial oppression and violent conflict to climate change and democracy. What if the way to change broken systems isn't by waiting for a hero or smashing the whole thing, but by practicing small, everyday habits that anyone, including you, can do? Adam and I explore how radical engagement, listening for what's unseen, and collaborating across deep differences can transform even the most difficult situations. This is a conversation about how each of us, wherever we sit, can help reshape the systems we live with and work within. Adam was on the podcast back in episode 262, Facilitating Breakthrough, How to Remove Obstacles, Bridge Differences, and move forward together. You want to learn more about him? Check out that episode as well. Let's meet Adam and see how we do it. Welcome to Richer Soul, Adam Kahane. It's great to have you back to join us again today.
Thanks, Rocky. Happy to be here again.
And I'm excited to continue our conversation from last time. Catch us up. I know you've done a lot of different things around the world and bringing people together. What have you been up to the last few years?
Well, same old. Working a lot on climate change with meager results, helping people worrying about democracy in the U.S., helping people who are worried about the relationship between the U.S. and China. So the usual kind of stuff, helping people who think they need to work together but aren't sure that they can do that, have a better chance of succeeding. And also my side job of writing about what I'm learning.
So you're not helping with U.S. and Canada then?
I think it's above my pay grade, although more seriously, it may not be obvious to you in the U.S., but this is a really frightening situation from the point of view of Canadians. A friend of mine who is sensible and moderate and well-informed said to me a few weeks ago, Canada is the Ukraine of North America. And that is a frightening analogy.
I guess that depends on whether or not you have countries from other parts of the world come to your borders, in which case, then yes, that would be a little bit of an issue. As long as that doesn't happen, I'm assuming that most of what you're hearing is rhetoric, but I'm not in the world of politics. And in the US, honestly, I don't think most people pay attention to that. It's kind of like the joke.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, you asked. It's just, I'm telling you that it's a frightening time to be, well, let me say more frightening than ever in my lifetime to be in Canada. People here are worried.
Well, hopefully it is not for anything and everything will settle at some point, but we shall see. I know there's a lot of globally, there is, let's call it deglobalization. And so I think the talk is that you go to more regional partners. And if we go to more regional partners, well, you're our partner to the north and you have a ton of resources that we use. So I see no reason why it wouldn't be a partnership. Forget about the current rhetoric, but it would
Yeah.
make sense. And what they talk about in the book is kind of North America, South America, because you've got tight trade routes, you've got easier ability to trade. And you talked about China. China may do its own thing, and we can't control that. But their alliances seem to be more on their side of the world. It's just like us going to Taiwan, right? That creates issues too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, well, is the world more dangerous then, or less dangerous, or safer, or is it just different?
I think it's more dangerous, but maybe not for the obvious reasons. I think I would just give two. One is that we're facing big global changes, especially to the climate on which our lives depend, just to state the big obvious one. So that's dangerous for many people, millions of people who are already starting to see their weather patterns and agricultural patterns and water availability and forest fires. So that's one way in which it's more dangerous for almost everybody. But the second is that I think that almost everywhere we're seeing that working together across difference is increasingly important and increasingly difficult. So I share the concern, people who talk about polarization and fragmentation and demonization. It's not just I don't agree with these people. It's not just that they're wrong, but they seem to be the devil themselves. I think that makes dealing with everything else. Working across difference is always difficult, but that makes it impossible. So in that sense, I think it's more dangerous just because our capacity to deal with the things we have to deal with is diminishing.
My question is it just more noise or is it actually more difference? I mean, in today's world, anyone can have a platform, so to speak.
Yeah.
The news loves, it bleeds, it leads, and, things tend to become more sensationalized than they necessarily are. And so is it more that sensationalization or is it
Yeah.
actual change or issues?
I think it's both. I think it's some of both. And certainly the number of times I've talked to people on all kinds of issues all around the world who say, well, I know it would be good if I could work with so and so, but I really am not willing to be in a room with so and so. And that makes working on things with across those so and so's impossible. So, and there is sensationalism and there is new media and, everybody with a fancy microphone's a podcaster. So,
Got to join the crowd. Well, there is that true. The one thing though I picked up from what you said is it's individual people saying I won't or I choose not to, which is never going to work in the long term. And hopefully we come to a shift where those type of people are going to be, I don't know what the right word is, pushed aside or replaced with people who will communicate
Yeah.
with the other side and come together. And I think we're seeing, there's another book, and I forget if I asked you about it, but The Fourth Turning. And that looks at how we go through these generations. And the theme of that book is we're in the generation we're supposed to be. We're behaving like we behave at this point in the game. And the good news is the next game is going to be so much nicer. So I'm just hoping to get there alive. That's all.
Me too.
So, what inspired you to write the book, Everyday Habits for Transforming Systems?
Well, it was actually quite a specific experience that led me to start thinking about everyday habits for transforming systems. I think around the same time you and I spoke last, which was in 1991, just after I published my previous book, Facilitating Breakthrough, I did a live interview of a man I've known for a long time. We're not close friends, but I've known him since 1991, an important South African politician and businessman and activist named Trevor Manuel. He was involved in the project I did in South Africa in 1991 that got me into this whole life of work, helping people collaborate across difference, which we were just talking about. And I did I'm not an experienced interviewer like you are, but I set up a 30-minute live interview of Trevor to talk to him about what he had done during the transition in South Africa, so the early 1990s, that had enabled South Africa to move from racial segregation to democracy, which is something that at the time almost nobody thought could be done peacefully. And I was asking Trevor about his experience and what he had focused on and what he thought was crucial. And it was a terrible interview in the sense that he was describing or was telling his story in a way that didn't make any sense to me. And I kept interrupting him and saying, well, don't you mean this? And don't you mean that? Anyhow, it was 30 minutes live. As soon as we hung up, I got messages from my colleagues, my wife saying, you're a terrible interviewer. Don't quit your day job, disaster. So this was embarrassing to me, very embarrassing, because Trevor's somebody I respect, but also confusing to me. Like, what was I missing? What was he saying that I wasn't getting? And so I spent a long time reading through the transcript over and over. And I realized that two things. Firstly, that the process of the work you do to transform systems looks completely different if you're in the middle of it on the front line, as Trevor was for years and years, as an activist, as a politician, eventually as a cabinet minister. It looks completely different from the middle than it does from outside, because I am an outsider in that. I'm a Canadian. At the time I met Trevor, I had never been to South Africa before. So that's number one. And secondly, it caused me to ask this question. Well, obviously transforming a system, any system, or any large system, whether it's South African politics or international trade or the climate system, this isn't a one-person job. Nobody does it by themselves. It's a collective activity involving many, many people. But that still raises the question, but what do each of the people involved need to do, not just every few years in an election or a workshop, but day to day? So that was the curiosity that provoked me to start to write a book called Everyday Habits for Transforming Systems. And I didn't know the answer. So I ended up talking to hundreds of people, of which that disastrous interview of Trevor was number one.
Sometimes we have to go through these things to have the much better on the other side.
Yeah. No, I'm privileged enough and foolhardy enough that I do lots of things that don't work. But I am also pretty disciplined about when things don't go as I expect them to. I take seriously what happened here and what can I learn and what am I missing and how do I need to change my point of view. So yes, it was good. It was just embarrassing at the time.
So let's just talk about what systems are, if you can explain them. And it also seems to be kind of where we started this conversation out, that our current systems are not working well. And I think people can see that, like higher education right now. There's a system that's not, even regular public education doesn't seem to be working well. Healthcare seems to be broken. There's probably a whole bunch of other systems. So if you could kind of explain what you mean by systems and then what you're seeing as to why they don't seem to be working well.
Well, I have a bookshelf in my office like your bookshelf, and I have a whole shelf of books on systems, and it's an impenetrable shelf. So I went to the what I consider to be the best and most straightforward and most readable classic text, which is a book, I think it's called Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows. Just a really excellent writer. She was a scientist, but she also wrote a weekly column for her local newspaper. So she had a very straightforward way of explaining complicated things. And she said a system is a collection of elements in relationship with one another that produces a characteristic set of outcomes. And I use that definition very precisely because it has three elements. It has the individual elements, the relationships between the elements, and the characteristic results. So, and I think that the great value about talking about this book in 2025 is that when I used to talk about these things 5 or 10 years ago, people would say, well, what's a system and what's wrong with how they're working? And I think nobody asked these. I think it's all a lot clearer than it was, in the sense that it's obvious that the way things are connected to each other affects what we can do and can't do. So the internet Riverside technological system allows us to have this conversation, which we wouldn't have been able to have 15 years ago. An interview like this, one of us would have had to travel, or maybe it would have just been on the phone. But it doesn't allow to do other things. I can't walk over to your bookshelf and take a book down. So this idea that we're all part of systems, and your list was very good: transport systems, energy systems, education systems, political systems, family systems, supply chain systems that produce certain results. They allow certain things to happen and they prevent other things from happening. So that's I think easier to understand. But also, and this was the key point you made, that it's obvious that lots of systems are producing bad characteristic results. Now, the issue is that the reason they're producing results and what they ought to be doing and what ought to change is, in fact, very contested. And if we just take the example we were talking about before, about the trade system, the North American trade system, some people think it's working fine, and some people think this is wrong with it, and some people think that's wrong with it. And so lots of people are trying to change it in all kinds of ways, and might make things better, might makes things worse. But in 2025, we no longer need to argue that that systems don't matter, or that all the systems are working just fine. We don't need to do anything about it. We just need to live within them. And so so the question the book asks: if you want to change them, what do you have to do? Not just big things once in a while, but every day.
And so that kind of begs the question. I mean, everyone who's listening is probably not in charge of the systems, right? They're individual players. They might be at different parts of the system. So let's just take medical. It's easy. Somebody might be a doctor who's listening, and so they are provider in the system. Many of us are probably patients. Somebody might work for an insurance company. Somebody might work for the government that does those types of things. But even if they are in those positions, they don't necessarily have the power to change systems by saying, hey, here's the new rule. All of you go do it. But yet we all have the power to bring about change. And so, how do we do that from wherever we currently sit?
Yeah. So that's crucial, Rocky. And I think there's almost no examples of one person changing a system. Even if you're the president of the United States, you're probably working with thousands of people to make the changes you're making. So, and one of the funny things about being a facilitator and coach is I've never met anybody, including presidents of countries, that don't say to me, well, those people won't let me do this thing. So I think so. The conclusion I reached on this very basic point, it's like page 1 of the book, is in fact, systems get transformed by many people doing many things for many reasons over many years. It's not one person wakes up and says, let's change everything. Now, of course, there are exceptions. If the system is, my system for organizing things on my desk, I suppose I can do that on my own, but there aren't many examples that small. Let me give you a new example that I heard just a few days ago when I was giving a public talk, which I think is really clear and it's visible. So it's the best example I can think of. And that is, I live in Montreal, in the city of Montreal, and there's a system for getting around in Montreal, for a transport system. And the way the system used to work is it was impossible, or it was extremely dangerous to go around Montreal by bike, not just because of the ice in the winter, but because you get hit by a car. And I remember when I was in high school, it just happened that in the building we had our high school, there was a guy who wanted more bicycling in Montreal. He was known as Bicycle Bob Silverman. And I remember very specifically as a high school student thinking he was a real lunatic, actually the craziest guy I'd ever heard of. Now, fast forward 50 years, and Montreal is a city that produces different results, that actually you can go everywhere on your bicycle. There's bike lanes, there's new rules. It's the behavior of the transport system has changed dramatically. And the reason it's a great example is you can see that was a result of many battles in city council and I guess in city engineering departments to figure out the rules and the infrastructure. But the city works differently than it did in this respect compared to when I was young. So systems get transformed all the time. And the question is, how can each of us contribute to that? That is also an example where one person didn't wake up one day and say, let's make this work for cyclists. No, it was literally decades of work by, I guess, hundreds of people, from engineers to activists to cyclists to car drivers that had to change their behavior to city council members who made that change.
And it's true. I think a lot of times, at least in America, they show one person as being the change. But in reality, it wasn't just that one person. There's a whole lot going on around them, or they might have been the tipping point person, but not necessarily the only driver of it. And sometimes we might forget that it does take more than one to get stuff done. Otherwise, we'd all have immense power and we could just change everything.
Well, I mean, the other example of that is people talk about the transition from apartheid to democracy in South Africa, and they say, well, Nelson Mandela was let out of prison and then he changed it. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. The African National Congress, Mandela's party, was founded in 1912. So it's literally a century of work by many people, activists, boycotts, intellectuals, priests, politicians, students in the United States, et cetera, et cetera.
One of the things you talk about in the book is radical engagement. What does that mean, and how does one become radically engaged? It sounds like we're going to blow up the world or something.
Yeah. So this is the one place I'm going to read from the book, because there's a paragraph that says this more clearly than I can off the top of my head. But this is the bottom line of the book. This is the in a way, the summary of the 7 habits. The book has a very simple structure. It's introduction, 7 habits, conclusion. But if you step back from the particularities of the 7 habits, and we can cover a few of these if you want, the overall story is radical engagement. And I'll read you the paragraph in a second, but when I went back and reread for the 20th time the transcript of the confusing conversation I'd had with Trevor Manuel, I realized this is what he was trying to explain to me that I didn't get. And engaging, the word, let me give you the definition and then the one paragraph. We transform a system not by sledgehammering the system, but by engaging in give and take with it, meaning taking part in, pledging oneself to, holding fast, entering into conflict with, and not by engaging superficially in a way that keeps the system as it is, as in I have a dinner engagement, but by doing so radically. And the root of the word radical doesn't mean extreme. It means root, like the word radish, meaning going to the root, affecting the foundation, naturally inherent, essential, fundamental. So here's the one paragraph that I wanted to read you. Radical engagement with the system doesn't mean participating in that system distractedly resigned, knowing it all, hierarchically at arm's length with arms crossed, superficially, impatiently saying take it or leave it. It means taking part in it alertly with hope and curiosity, horizontally, leaning forward, hands-on, digging deep, persisting, and above all, reciprocally and relationally. So I'm not going to read the whole book to you on this podcast, but I'm pretty happy with that paragraph. And that's what I mean. I mean, it's not this, like, okay, I get it. It's this, like, how does this work? How do you think this works? What could we do? What's happening here? Let's see.
It's leaning in and understanding what's going on and trying to bring about change.
Yeah, through working with what's going on rather than just announcing what needs to be different.
That makes sense. So I know there are 7 habits in the book. Do you want me to just quickly rattle them off and then we talk about them? What's the best way to do this?
Yeah, why don't you rattle them off, and then why don't you ask me about the 1 or 2 that you think that caught your attention?
So habit 1 is acting responsibly, which is not just doing what's expected of us, nor it's not just doing what we want. Correct? Habit 2 is relating in 3 dimensions. And so what you talk about is most of the world relates in 2 dimensions. And to me, we can get into this later if you mean this. Most people look at a situation as black and white. It's not, it's 50 shades of gray, right? So that's kind of another dimension. Habit 3 is looking for what's unseen, not just seeing what we always see. There's a lot of complexity to everything. And a big part of that one is also learning to listen and knowing the outcome you want. You know how many people go through life, they don't even know what they want out of their life. Like, if you don't know the outcome, how do we get there? Habit 4 is working with cracks, not just ignoring or shying away from them. Habit 5 is experimenting a way forward. So trying new things, maybe things you aren't familiar with. Habit 6 is collaborating with unlike others. Everybody wants to be with their team, their group. You got to get out into the messy world. And it's funny because even during the last few elections, when the news actually does its job and brings a bunch of people together who are very disparate and has conversations and records them, they're like, America's not fighting. They all seem to get along over here, even though none of them agree. Habit 7, persevering and resting. So it's not just a short sprint. And it's kind of, you've got to go back and forth. And sometimes there's a right time. You talked about Nelson Mandela, and it started in 1912. That's a hell of a long sprint, right? Takes time. These things don't always occur. And sometimes you have to wait for the right time for something to occur. We had talked in the beginning about generational changes. We're in we're in a period of rapid change or a breaking down of old institutions. So sometimes you have to wait for these periods to happen. So as I'm reading through those, habit 2, relating in 3 dimensions, seems interesting. And also habit 3 seems to have a few. And then if we've got time, we'll maybe cover another one. So let's talk about relating in 3 dimensions, not just 1 or 2 dimensions that we're comfortable with. So maybe if you pick an issue and showing the 1 dimension, 2 dimension, 3
Yeah.
dimensions so people understand it. This episode of Richer Soul is sponsored by the Profit Answer Man podcast. If you're a business owner who wants to scale and grow, increase profits, or want to have strategic conversations around your financials, then check out the podcast. You'll learn how to work less, increase cash flow, increase profits, and build reserves to help you weather storms. It's built on the profit first methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform.
Okay. So thanks for that, Rocky. And lots of people have told me that habit 2 is the one that's hardest to grasp. They find it very useful when they get it, but it's the only one that's not straightforward. So I'm happy to explain it. And I agree with you that the world is 50 shades of gray, to use your expression, although I didn't really realize this was a podcast about 50 shades of gray. That's the one I'm doing next week. No, I agree with you that viewing the world in black and white is extremely problematic. And it goes back to what I said at the beginning of this conversation about one of the ways in which I think the world is more dangerous now than before, because I think there's more black and white thinking. But that's not what I mean by this habit 2. What I mean is, how do we relate with others? And I'm saying there's 3 different ways of relating with others. They're all correct, but most people choose only 1 or 2, and it works better if you use all 3. And the simplest example I can think of is this conversation. So dimension 1 is, you and I, Rocky, are actors in this system. So we're doing a podcast together. We're trying to produce a particular outcome. You've got your role. I've got my role. Actors like actors in a play. I don't mean we're reading from a script, but we each have a role to play, and together we produce this outcome. So you could say the key dimension there is we're parts of a whole, in this case, the whole of this 1-hour podcast production system. So that's true, and it's important, and you and I are both aware of that. We didn't even need to talk about it. It's a pretty straightforward, the way in which we're parts of this simple whole of a podcast production system. But there's a second thing that's going on, which is that we each have our own worlds. We each have our own technical setups. I mean, the fact that 2 days ago I couldn't get my camera to work, this is just something about the way I'm set up. I have a family here. There's things going on behind me that I'm aware of that you're not aware of. I have an interest which is not the same as yours. I'm trying to get the word out about my book and the sales of my book and my reputation, and you presumably. So we're aware of that. Again, it's not very complicated, but for this thing to work, I need to at least be aware, as I am, that, well, Rocky's got his thing and he does this podcast, and I need to help him do his thing and, his career and his living. So that's the second way, that we're each parties, like parties in a contract or parties in a lawsuit, or we're each, which means you're you and I'm me, and we need to have some awareness and some respect for the fact that we're each parties, not just parts of a whole. And thirdly, and this is maybe not so explicit, but in a certain way, we're relatives. We have a human connection. We haven't spoken about it. I've only met you twice, but I'm aware that I'm talking to a fellow human being. And I guess this is not a video podcast, but we're doing it by video. And the fact that I'm looking at the expression on your face and I can see, when you're interested and when you're distracted or when you're confused, when you're puzzled. And so, and I'm trying. All of this is, I'm deliberately giving you a simple example, but the fact that we're both humans and that produces a certain connection, and maybe we'll talk about personal things on this podcast, maybe we won't, but even if we don't talk about it, I'm aware that you're not just an actor in a system, you're not just a party, but you're a fellow human being. And so what I'm saying is most people pay attention to only one or two of those dimensions. Actors, treating others as actors, treating others as parties, and treating actors as kin, K-I-N. And I'm saying that if you want to be effective, you need to pay attention to all three.
And that makes sense. And I know the first time you were on, you talked about how you brought groups of different people together. And part of that was actually to have free time to let people get together and get to know each other over time. And there are times where even if they don't like each other, they can still work together.
Well, this is very important. And as you know, I published a book some years ago called Collaborating with the Enemy, and which is sort of a double click on Habit 6, Collaborating with Unlike Others. And I'm publishing a new edition of that in November of this year. But yes, the thing that there's two things that most people don't know, but I think you do. The first is it is possible to work with people we do not agree with or like or trust. It's not easy. It's not straightforward. It may not, I prefer to work with people we agree with and like and trust, but often those aren't the people we need to work with. And secondly, and this is really not obvious, the key is the third dimension. The key is, I may not agree with you, I may not like you, but we are fellow human beings. I see what you're trying to do. And that's so many of my stories from my work life are stories of people who connect as fellow human beings, and that enables them to do some stuff together, even though they may still violently disagree on all kinds of things.
The simplest example I can think of is a local sports team. Because even people who are fighting over politics or their beliefs or everything else come together to root for the same team, regardless of their background.
Yeah.
And they don't even think twice about it.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny how that is. You just distract people and they'll do something different.
Well, I would put it another way. I think it's a good example. But I think this idea that we can't work with people we don't agree with. Somebody said to me earlier today, don't we need to have the same values to work together? I don't know where this idea came from, that this is a prerequisite. Obviously, it would be, it's easier and nice. It would be good if it could happen. But the truth is we can work with people who are very different from us. And when I was rewriting Collaborating with the Enemy, I spent a month at an academic institution. I'm not an academic. I don't spend much time in that world. But I said, I'm working on a book. I'm rewriting a book called Collaborating with the Enemy, How to Work with People You Don't Agree With or Like or Trust. And there was a guy in the group, an urban historian. He studies cities, not something I know anything about. And he said, Adam, you write it as though that's something extraordinary. That's the definition of a city. A city is where people live together and get on with people, most of whom they don't agree with or like or trust. Why are you saying it's extraordinary? It's actually ordinary. And I thought it was a very, very good corrective. So this idea that's come up recently that if we don't agree with each other or we don't like each other, we can't do anything together, we have to kill each other, is a terrible misunderstanding and belied by most city life all around the world forever.
Interesting. Why do you think people have so much trouble with this particular habit?
Which one? Number two?
Number two.
Oh, I just think it's well, I think they have trouble understanding the chapter because it's the most abstract of the seven, and what it might mean by three dimensions. But I think the reason they have trouble doing it is because these are three different languages. You know, if I think of the climate world, for example, I've done a lot of work in climate change locally and nationally and globally, and these are three different discourses that never meet. I mean, people who talk about climate change and the atmosphere and 1.5 degrees C and carbon dioxide emissions, they talk as though they say we're all on this planet together, we're all affected by the climate, as though that's the end of the story. They talk about actors in this case, the global economic engineering climate system. That's the only thing they talk about. 90% of the discourse in that world is about, what's best for the whole. Now that's true, but there's a second part of what's going on, which is what's best for me as somebody who needs my car to get around, and you who live within walking distance of the grocery store, and you a coal company employee, and you a solar cell manufacturer, and you a farmer in India. We have very different interests. We're parties, and that's why the Climate Negotiation Forum, what's called the COP stands for Conference of the Parties. The reason it's hard is because different parties have different interests. So these are two different discourses. And the third discourse is a very, a quiet one. It's there, but it's quiet, which is, hey, we're all beings on this planet, humans, non-humans, and we're related. When things don't go well for some, others feel it. So I think people find it difficult because they get stuck in one of these three. And it's a big shock. They don't understand the other two.
Interesting. Anything else on habit 2 before we go over to habit 3?
No.
Okay. Looking for what's unseen. And as part of that is also learning to listen. And we talk about that a lot. People don't necessarily listen, or they're waiting to respond, or they're listening for the one thing they can fight out of it all.
Yeah.
But what did you mean by looking for what's unseen?
No, it is that. And it's interesting when I listen to the way you pose the question, because I've written a lot and done a lot of work on listening. My first book is called Solving Tough Problems, an open way of talking, listening, and creating new realities. So, and I have a long-standing argument with a friend of mine who's an audio, not an audio engineer, but an audio artist. And he's really upset that this chapter is called looking for what's unseen rather than listening for what's unheard. He thinks so they're both good metaphors. I can't even remember why I called it looking for what's unseen. But yes, I think this idea that exactly as you said, we often don't listen. I'm just waiting for your mouth to stop moving so that I can get back to telling you the way about things are, or we focus on the things we don't agree with. So, but the point of this habit of habit 3 is, if you want to find a way to make a difference in the system, you have to be able to hear or see. These are equivalent metaphors for me, more than what you're seeing. And the trick to that, it's not very complicated. It involves listening to somebody or talking with somebody or seeing through the eyes of somebody who is in a different part of the system. But if you just talk to people who are situated where you are and see what you're seeing and think what you're thinking, then you're unlikely to understand enough to be able to figure out what to do. But looking for what's unseen, the easy way to see what's not seeing is for me to go to somebody who's somewhere different and say, hey, how does this look to you? And the big revelation in that first workshop that I did 34 years ago in South Africa is when you have a meeting where the participants are people from different parts of the system, in this case, different parts of South Africa, black and white, men and women, business, government, civil society, opposition, establishment. When you're trying to see what you're not seeing, you don't need to commission a study or go to a library, you just turn to the person sitting next to you and say, what's it look like from where you are? And you can really learn a lot very fast that way. But it requires you to get out of your bubble and be willing to talk to somebody who sees something different and thinks something different and wants something different. That's the point. That's what habit 3 is.
There's a couple questions I have on this. In the world of money, I will hear people say things under their breath. They'll say them out loud, but it's like the offhanded comment that you're like, oh, that's interesting that they think that way. So you might say, oh, we went out to this wonderful restaurant. And people might say something like, must be nice. Like the sarcasm of,
Right.
or they just feel they could never do something like that.
Yeah.
And I guess part of that's easy when you're of the same culture.
Yeah.
But when you're across different cultures, you probably totally miss that meaning of, I don't know what the euphemisms or ways of saying things locally that don't translate well as well. But it's also listening for that little comment that's off the cuff as well.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I often find in meetings, for example, that you can have a hour meeting in somebody's office, and it's interesting, but it's when you stand up and go to the door that they say the thing that really explains the whole thing. So it's almost like when I relax and I'm not worried about the meeting itself, that we can talk about what turns out to be very interesting. It's also not symmetrical. Somebody was saying to me this morning that hierarchy plays a big role, that things look different from the bottom or from the top. And, women understand how men think better than men understand how women think in patriarchal systems, etc. So, but yes, I think what's required is exactly what you said. It's the alertness and the curiosity to say, oh, that was just an offhand comment, or that was just a passing comment, or that was something I really didn't get. I wonder why they said that. Why did they focus on that thing? My favorite joke about this is a man comes into a bar, sits down at the bar, and the bartender, and he's got, man walks into a bar, he's got a parrot growing out of his forehead. He sits down at the bar, and the bartender says, "What happened to you?" And the parrot says, "I don't know. I woke up this morning with just a pimple on my ass." And I've always liked that joke because you think it's about the man, and then it's about the parrot. So so what's the other way to look at it? Why did they say it that way? When I talk about this, I always talk about A, but when you talk about it, you talk about B. And rather than just rushing past that to say, why does Rocky keep mentioning this thing? I don't get it. There's something in Rocky's mind. He's seeing something I'm not seeing. Maybe it'll turn out to be important. Maybe it won't. Maybe it'll be interesting. Maybe it won't. But I could pause and say, Rocky, why do you focus on that? What are you seeing there?
When you mentioned earlier about they don't speak till you walk out the door, it reminds me of Columbo. And I don't know if you ever watched Columbo years ago.
Yeah.
He was a detective.
He would pause at the door, right? Yeah.
He would always walk out the door, almost shut the door, open the door again, poke his head in with a simple little offhanded question.
Yeah.
And it was that question that always got the criminal to give up, because it was like, oh, I'm done and the conversation's over. And he would just put that little poke and he would always, find his way back in. And honestly, in the world of sales, it's that same concept.
Mm-hmm.
It's that once the not the tension, but once you drop your guard, and that's kind of what you said. At the end, you tend to drop your guard, and that's where the conversations happen. I do like the concept of listen for what's unheard, because I think That's something we can all do no matter what. The other thing that came up when thinking about this particular one was the concept of the hidden agenda. And it's looking for what's unseen in a sense. A lot of times you'll see people come out and promote a particular topic or whatever it is. And when you start to dig into it, you realize I didn't know. So, you were talking about climate change. A particular person's out talking about something. And the next thing you know, they actually work for the coal company. But
Yeah.
nobody ever said that. Or maybe it's a woman or man, and we won't be, and their spouse works for the coal company,
Yeah.
which is,
Yeah.
these things happen.
So I think that's a good example of what I call the second dimension, people as parties rather than as actors. And what's really so clear to me from the work I do is that asking people to leave their agendas at the door is an illegitimate or manipulative request. Everybody's got an agenda. And when we're only in actor speak, we're not allowed to discuss our agendas. It's considered selfish or not being a team player. But every single person has an agenda. And what I mean by the party, the second dimension, the party dimension is okay. Let me find out, why are you saying what you're saying? You don't have to hide it. You're working for a coal company. You believe this, or your income depends on it, or your boss told you have to say this. I need to understand that. Otherwise, we have no hope of finding a solution. And I'm sure in sales, you know a lot more about sales than I do. I'm sure or maybe the key to sales is understanding what's going on for the buyer, what matters to them. You never ask that. You keep saying, look, this product is great for you. It's great. You say, oh, like what is it that matters to you? What are you trying to get out of this product? That's has to be the way to make at least any complex sale.
Sales are not about the product. And this is, I think, where most people get it wrong. Don't worry about the product. Figure out what the pain is.
Yeah.
And show them that you can solve their pain. They don't care what the product is.
Yeah.
All they care is that you're willing to solve their pain, and it's only going to cost this much. And if you can solve their pain for this much, they'll hand it to you.
So that's what I mean by the second dimension, which is what is it that matters to each person, which is not the same as how are we in this together, and it's not the same as us as relatives. These are all true, but they're not the same perspective.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I know we only have a couple minutes here. If you look at the rest of the habits, whether individually or maybe in totality, is there something else that people should walk away with from this conversation?
Yeah, there is. Some of these habits were things I'd thought about or written about before, and some of them were new to me. And one of the ones that was new to me that came up in the interviews I did to write the book is the habit, whatever number it is, working with cracks. And I found this image of cracks, which I'd never used before, this metaphor, really helpful. That we think of systems as monolithic and smooth and stable, but they're not. They're always moving. They're always cracking. And if you get up close, you can find out what to work with. And as a Montrealer, I'm obliged by my citizenship in every interview to quote Leonard Cohen at least once. And of course, he has a very famous song which uses this image. He says, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in, which is a wonderful image. But when you look at the song, I think actually the sentences before that are even more interesting. He says, ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And so this idea that there's something every single one of us can do, it might not be obvious, but there's something within reach, a bell that every one of us can ring, given our position in the system. But the requirement is forget perfection. Forget that the plan has to be perfect. The solution has to be perfect. The partners have to be perfect. You have to be perfect. Give up on that. And I'm surprised at how on point this chorus is. to this song. I think it's called Anthem by Leonard Cohen.
When you talked about that, and I think you might have even mentioned it, the Japanese culture is to look at things quite differently. And when a ceramic piece or a china piece got broken, they repair it. God forbid we repair anything these days. And they repair it with gold or other types of glittery things. And in their culture, they value the repair, the crack, the imperfection is
Yeah,
what makes it great. And it's also what makes it unique and
yeah,
different. And so they, in a sense, they celebrate the cracks. They also celebrate and look at the shadows
yeah,
as well. And I think those are the things that are multidimensional that we forget about, that you don't necessarily have to have perfection. Here, I think TV culture, Hollywood culture makes you have to be perfect. And if you're not, well, let's get you some plastic surgery to make you perfect. But what if we just enjoy the cracks and enjoy the differences and be okay with that? Thoughts on that or expounding?
no, I love the image, and the way I'm using the word cracks in the book is that this is how you transform systems, not by blow, or you can transform by blowing the whole thing up, but that is pretty risky. But a better way, or a more productive way, is to say there's things changing, cracking. If I can see that, I know where I can work and have an impact with the limited resources and capacity I have. And so what I'm saying is exactly like that Japanese, I think it's called kitsugi, I can't remember the name, is rather than avoid the cracks or say, no, everything's fine, there's nothing wrong, it's perfectly smooth. No, to say, no, pay attention to the cracks. That's where the light gets in. That's where you can make a difference.
And it's true. If you want to get something done politically, rather than trying to, as you said, blow up the system or that, you find the one crack that people will agree to. And that's where you can get yourself in. And once you're in, then you can expand from there. And that happens in many different parts of
Yeah,
politics and bringing it about.
exactly.
Well, thank you for joining us today. If people would like to learn more, get the book, learn more about you, how do they do all of that?
Really not very hard. Adam Kahane, ADAMKAHANE, adamkahane.com will bring you to my website and the website of Rios Partners. And I wouldn't say the book is piled up in airports, but it is available. It is available from your local bookstore, this book and my 5 others.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Rocky.
Here's the reality. Systems shift when we engage differently, not when we wait for perfection or somebody else. By practicing simple habits, relating in 3 dimensions, listening for what's unheard, working with the cracks, you can help transform the very structures that shape your life and community. Adam reminds us that transformation is not about a single leader or a flawless plan. It's about many people doing many things for many reasons over many years. Some of this stuff, it just takes time. So the question is, what small habit can you practice this week to shift a system you're part of? And do you know people in a system who could benefit from this conversation? Would you do me a favor and share the episode with them? I'm sure they'll appreciate you for it. Thank you for listening. Have an abundant week.